This week on the show, we're delighted to introduce Tim Paton to our listeners. Now, Tim, you are a photography consultant with probably over 30 years of experience in the industry now. I don't want to age you too much.
Yeah.
And we've personally had dealings in the past together, and our paths have crossed in many different formats and ways, and I constantly see your name popping up on the scene. Can you just give us a little bit of an introduction as to who you are and what it is you do and what it is you've done?
Yeah, so it's Tim Paton, by the way, just in case.
Sorry.
Don't worry.
Oh,
It's fine. Everyone, literally,
I
Straight
get that
away,
all the
Greg.
time with Fennel Funnel, so I should be the
It's
most.
hilarious. I get it all the time. I'm very so briefly, I guess I've spent my career in photography. I started off as a photographer myself, working for the NME. Or I started off originally in local newspapers, which is I could probably write a book about that in a sort of a comedic way. And then I moved up to London and worked for the NME for 10 years as a music photographer. And then I started my own photo agency for 20 years. And then I joined Magnum as commercial manager. And I've been, the last 4 or 5 years, I've just been a freelance photo agent. So essentially what I do is I have a network of photographers who call on my help occasionally if they have a commercial job. So I sort of step in and do their budgets for them and the productions for them. And I have a couple of brands who I commission photographers for fairly regularly as well. So enough to keep me busy, which is nice. But it's not, there's been certain occasions where it's been full on, and this is a slightly more relaxed, environment for me now.
Well, I imagine with running an agency would have been a very different thing to then working inside a large agency that's been around for 70 years. Obviously those were different stages of your career. What were the kind of and the industry itself looked very different back then, I guess, when you started your agency. What kind of year would that have been that you were?
Yeah, so I think I probably started my agency 95.
Wow. Okay.
And
what was it? What was it called?
It's called Balcony Jump.
Right.
And what you have to remember then, literally the only way I had of showing a picture to someone was to actually physically walk in with the picture.
Yeah.
Or send the picture in the post, which blows your mind now because we're looking at pictures all the time digitally, and so everyone was shooting on film, and so it was right through that transition of all the photographers having to figure out digital and kind of move into building a website and then getting into social media and all that. So I started it literally in my spare room in my house in Tooting. Had it there for 5 years, then moved to an office in Hammersmith, and then I moved to an office in Camden. But it was it's like all these things. You have some really amazing months, and then you have some quiet months. And what people forget about being an agent is you're like a commission-only salesman. If none of the photographers are working, and you're not getting your 25%. So, but you still have the office, and you still have the staff, and you still have the overhead. So it's a pretty hairy thing. But as I say, there was some incredible moments, incredible times, and that transition was incredible. Looking back, in terms of how some photographers took it up quicker than others in terms of moving into digital, and some were quite slow.
I have to ask, I'm sure some people are also thinking this. Why did you suddenly go, do you know what? Did you continue to shoot, or did you kind of stop shooting and then become the agency?
Yeah, so I was always slightly better at organizing stuff than I was actually taking pictures. It was like the organization and working for the NME. I got to 30 and I suddenly realized I was the oldest guy in the room. And
right.
And I was, going to 5 or 6 gigs a night, a year, a month, a week.
A night?
No, not a night, a week. I was going, and it was just like, and also with working for the NME as editor, I got to 30 and was totally skipped. So it was a bit of a moment, and I knew a lot of photographers, most of the music photographers, who were absolutely rubbish at organizing their lives, and so I sort of started managing a couple of photographers, and then I took on this one commercial photographer. Well, he was a street photographer. He was a guy called Nick Turpin, who I ended up repping for about 10 years, and then we started getting ad jobs, and it was extraordinary. We got this ad brief, and we had no idea what to charge. And I asked people around, and they were like, "Stick it in at 80 grand." And we were like, "No way, absolutely not." There's more money than we'd ever come across, especially for taking pictures. So this is how long ago I faxed it in.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. And we went out for a pub, came back, and there was a message on my answer phone from the guy. Message on my answer phone, no mobile, obviously. And the guy going, "Yeah, it's fine. Come in tomorrow and chat about it." And you're like, it's like walking into some sort of parallel universe. And then he started doing big ad jobs, and it just sort of went from there. I attracted more commercial photographers and built up the roster that way. And but it was a slight sort of revelation. Previous to that, I was getting paid £25 a job for the NME. So
Yeah,
it
that's
was
a jump.
It was a jump, and I've always enjoyed sort of being around the creative process, and so being an agent sort of suited me really more than. I mean, I still take pictures occasionally, but just for myself really.
Nice.
But it did help. It did help that I'd been a photographer. It really did, because I sort of understood. I understood the struggle.
Well, you're gonna have that empathy, right? You're gonna understand, well, exactly, the struggle, because it's a bit of a tough gig. I don't know if we've ever mentioned on the show before, but it's a tough gig.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is, and I don't know if it's necessarily gotten easier, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah, there's so many different ways of doing it. This is the problem. Everyone goes to me, what should I do? And I mean, I can tell you one way of running your career, then someone else the next day will tell you the completely opposite way.
Yeah.
And there's no right or reason. Most of us sort of just bounce around from one opportunity to another.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because obviously, with all the goodwill in the world, you kind of think, right, well, this is going to be the plan. This is where I want to take my career. This is my 5-step plan, or the action, whatever. And then you suddenly go, well, I've been completely derailed because I got a job in over here, or my life changed and I've had to move here. And we have such fluid schedules, lives, that actually it's very hard to plan.
Well, I mean, you could, I'm sort of looking back on it from a 35-year career, and there were moments in my career where an opportunity appeared, and you just have to be good enough to be able to deal with make the opportunity really good, because there's sometimes a job comes in, and it feels like a real pivot, not only in terms of the amount of money you're getting paid, but in terms of the style you're shooting, and suddenly you find your lane and you find your thing you're into. Whether it's lifestyle, food, whatever it is, suddenly you find yourself working for a travel magazine, and you become a travel photographer, and it's not really, it's quite hard. I guess you probably lean to the things you like, but at the same time, it's, when I first started working for the enemy, I literally just walked in with a portfolio of bands that I shot, and the woman was on the picture desk, and she put the phone down and said, "What are you doing this evening?" She just had a cancellation, and I went out and shot a gig for the enemy, and then I started working for the enemy for 10 years. So it's the little moments, like the sliding doors moments, where you're just like,
Yeah.
and I guess you probably had that in your career as well. And the point is that you've got to understand those moments and make sure that you're as good as you can be on that at that time.
We're talking about like right place, right time. Do you know the Dr. Seuss book story? So Dr. Seuss, the guy who obviously makes the incredibly famous kids books. I don't know if his story is true or not. I should probably look it up before I tell it. But apparently, he'd gone through, shown his books to all the publishing houses, and no one was interested. And he literally had come out of the last one and was just about to throw it all in the bin. And at the moment, as he was like hovering over the bin, apparently he just was like, "Oh, hello," and he bumped into an old friend from college or school, and he was like, "Oh, what are you up to? Do you want to get a drink?" And he was, "Oh yeah, I've just become head of children's books at X, Y, and Z." He was like, "Oh, I'm just about to chuck my children's book in the bin," and that they then took it straight in.
Yeah, I mean, there's hundreds. I mean, Nick Turpin, who I worked with for years, he was my first big commercial photographer. I first met him at a party, a friend's party, for dinner, and it wasn't, he didn't bring his portfolio. It's like, "You're a photographer." "Oh, I'm an agent." You had that. "What are you coming for?" he hadn't seeked me out, or I hadn't seeked him out. And, so you look at the sort of serendipity of the sort of randomness of, which, I actually, as an agent, I quite like the randomness of it. And, some people hate it. But I think if you're going to be a successful photographer, you have to understand that it is a collection of random events.
It is. I struggle. I live slightly out of London, so my proximity to those random events is, I think, is slightly limited. But Greg is much better at that than I am. I
I
will
think
say.
that the big thing what we all noticed in COVID was suddenly those interactions in person kind of disappeared for a while, and so much of that when those interactions happen online, when people serendipitously discover you online, it's a lot less powerful in some ways. I mean, in some ways, they can get a quicker handle on who you are, but they're so much quicker to be distracted by something else. You know, you
Yeah.
can see 10 amazing photographers in a couple of minutes through emails if you're a picture editor, but then suddenly you get called into a meeting, and by the time you come back, you might have forgotten 3 of them, 4 of them, whatever. Like it's that the sticking power is a lot harder to hold.
Yeah, I mean that's the problem now. Is you know, when I first started as an agent, it was because you couldn't find a young photographer in Argentina because there was no way, unless they put a book out or something, but there was no
Yeah,
way of actually finding. So the commissioners were commissioning 50 photographers they knew in London, you know,
yeah,
Mhm.
and that was it, you know. So if you got into that exclusive club as an
yeah.
agent, you know, and there was 30 commissioners in London and the ad agencies, if you got into that club, you were probably okay, and you had a good set of photographers, you did okay. But then social media kind of broadened that out, which I actually think is a good thing. You know, I think that,
Mhm.
you know, the opportunities now for young photographers all over the world are incredible because their work can be seen, they can build a following, and they, you know, the opportunities are better. But on the downside of that, there's just a lot of people doing it, and there's you know, the white noise coming at you all day, every day is big.
I kind of want to circle back a little bit to your beginnings with your agency. I'd be interested to hear what, you know, after running that for the years that you ran it, what were your kind of big takeaways from seeing, you know, working with different photographers, representing different photographers, and the way that they obviously all work differently. Um, your kind of understanding of the industry, how did that change? How did it affect your perception of, you know, good business practice versus bad business practice, or ways of thinking? I'm just interested to see if you had any major takeaways from that time that
Well,
you
I
kind
mean,
of.
as an agent, you know, there's a few things I'd do differently. I mean, I just wanted to say that Balcony Jump, after 20 years, went actually bankrupt, which was
Wow, yeah.
not my finest moment. So, but I the last 2 or 3 years was a big struggle. I made one mistake, which was, well, probably made more than one, but the major mistake was I opened an office in New York, which
Ah.
was wildly expensive, and it was mostly a vanity project. It was kind of interesting because we did get some work out of America, but we didn't get enough to cover the cost of it, and so you're sort of carrying a debt with that. But my
Mhm.
major takeaways were it I think if you're gonna be an agent, you just gotta keep your costs down because you never know what's gonna happen from one from, yeah. You know, I did the whole sort of big office in London with 5 or 6 people working there. And that was, I guess, a time when clients used to come to the office and do that, you know, and people weren't
Mm,
working remotely. Everyone came and sat in the same room when we so and also it's all just about the photographers you represent.
Mhm.
It's about the talent, you know, and you've got to pick your photographers wisely. And I say this to young photographers who are looking for agents. It's like, what is your commercial value? You know, unfortunately, you know, there might be a photographer that you love, but you know that he or she is not going to actually do that well commercially just
mm,
because of the nature of the pictures. So there's I had to be quite ruthless on the photographers I chose to work with. So I had to actually see a creative path I mean, a commercial path that I could take them on and earn some money because I had wages to pay and rent to pay. And it sort of became a slightly sort of, you know, a bit of a sort of that when you're making those kind of decisions, you know,
mhm.
it was quite hard. But yeah, I think just keep the costs down, and it's all just about getting the mix of the roster right. I was not a fan of having 10 photographers all doing the same thing. I liked each photographer to have its own space in the commercial. So I'd
Mm,
only have like one still life and one sports and one
Mhm.
portrait. I didn't want them all competing against each other for the same jobs. I much preferred to sort of keep whereas some agencies, you know, they're renowned for being fashion or they're renowned for, you know, being a still life agency or something. So I preferred to have a photographer in each sphere if I could.
Mm. And did you think that there were any particular kind of traits that you saw in the photographers that succeeded over the ones that didn't, or
Yes,
attitudes?
definitely, definitely. I mean, they were incredibly enthusiastic and incredibly passionate.
Mhm.
There was a guy called Alan Clark who I took on for I had him for about 3 or 4 years. He was a young fashion photographer, and he came to me and he was more or less homeless. He had no money, but all he did was take pictures. And all he did, he had so much energy and so much go, and he was like he didn't I was like he had no money, no he's nowhere to live, but he was still taking pictures. And he
Mm.
had the and he was always hustling, always trying to make something work, always meeting up with someone, always doing something, and or doing taking a lot of personal work. You know, I I
Yeah.
I always thought it's really important. I always preferred to see the photographer's personal work, really, because that you
Mm.
can understand a lot from them for that.
Mhm.
And it was just, he was just, and you walked in the room and you kind of knew that this guy would push through. And then there were some photographers who got an agent and sat on their sofa and waited for the commercial jobs to arrive through the window, and it just doesn't work like that.
No.
You know,
Mm.
you've got to be taking pictures every day. That's what you do. It's like you get up and
Mhm.
take pictures. That's your passion.
Yeah,
So
you gotta flex that muscle.
yeah,
So
And as an agent, I mean, obviously you're kind of stepping in the room on their behalf at times and having to negotiate for them and stuff. Is there anything that you came to understand about the way that companies work with kind of budgets and with their approaches to I mean, from a photographer's point of view, sometimes you go into these you go into 3 ways or 6-way kind of bidding processes, and it's really it's all kind of behind the curtain, and you never really get to see kind of what decisions were made and why. And sometimes when you do find out later, and it might be like a year later, you happen to bump into someone and says, oh yeah, no, so and so got that job, and it was based purely on the fact that they had this one picture in their book, or that they responded
yeah.
to the email faster or whatever. Like it must have been fascinating to kind of see that and understand the business side of the industry.
There are so many reasons why a photographer gets booked and doesn't get booked, and unfortunately, a lot of them are incredibly random. And most of the time, because I had a relationship with the art buyer by then, I would be able to say to them, what kind of budget is this, and they'll go, look, we've got 50 grand all in. We need 30 for the production, and then you can kind of do the budget. You're in the right ballpark. It's incredibly hard. Someone comes to you. I mean, I had a job the other day come in and from the big supermarket, and I put the budget in, and I was wildly over. But I, it's incredibly hard to judge where you need to put the budget, and what. So it's about the relationship you have with the commission. You
mm,
could find out early on. But the reason why a photographer get picked is incredibly random. I mean, sometimes it could be because they have a picture of a guy walking a dog in a red jumper, and that's a shot they want,
Mm,
or I remember I had this guy Benedict Redgrove, who's a really great car photographer, and he got a job through Gucci. He got a job randomly. They just phoned up Gucci and said we want to book him for the next campaign, and I was like, I got the job in, and I got stuffed on the fees, obviously, because they're Gucci, but we did the job, and it was an amazing job. And I spoke to the creative director. I said, "How did you find him?" Just because I was interested to find. He said, "Well, I was sitting on the Eurostar, and there was a copy of Wallpaper magazine in the scene. He picked up a copy of Wallpaper magazine. He was flicking through, and he saw one of Ben's pictures, and it was exactly what he wanted. Now, I couldn't have constructed that scenario in a million years, but
no.
but but the point is that he would spend his time shooting for Wallpaper,
Right.
mm,
or and not getting paid and getting paid rubbish, but doing a brilliant job for Wallpaper.
Mhm.
So it's a
mm.
consistency of shooting great work because people are going to see it. It's great, you know.
Well, traditionally, shooting editorial was that kind of way of getting your
Yeah,
name out. But I do wonder now, like, how many people are actually looking at magazines. I personally still love shooting for magazines. I love editorial photography. I love those
Same.
commissions because they're the most creative in some
Mhm.
ways. And it's nice to be working on something that has got a certain way of being laid out, because then you can shoot to the design. Whereas shooting for online, there's no restrictions, so there's less parameters. It's harder to know what it's going to look like, and invariably, I'm still amazed at
Yeah.
this. Like even in this day and age, like when stuff gets used online, it doesn't seem to be used in a particularly exciting way.
Well, I mean, it's about access. So again,
Mm.
going back to Benedict Redgrave, if he wanted to shoot cars, so we got him shooting for Formula One magazines and things like that, and or BMW magazine, and it meant he got access to the cars. You
Yeah,
know,
that's true.
so it's the same with fashion. You know, if you're shooting a little piece of fashion somewhere and you're working with a great stylist, and the stylist happens to be also work for, Mr. Porter or something, then you can
Mm.
and you come across well and you take some great pictures, you might be able to work for a brand because,
Yeah.
the stylist is information. So those kind of smaller shoots, as long as you pick the right one and you pick, and it makes sense to you what you're trying to do as a photographer,
Mhm.
you know, they're worth doing. But I see a lot of photographers running around town just shooting everything, getting paid nothing, and 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 none of it makes sense because one day they're shooting a portrait, next day they're shooting a still life, and none of it. They're just saying yes to everything because they want to be a full-time photographer, and
Yeah.
none of it. There's no sort of thought behind what am I trying to do here? What's the style? What lane am I trying to get into? You know,
Yeah. I think at
but
the start of the career, though, that can be sort of useful in terms
yes,
of um, just giving you on the job training. Like if you're
yes,
able to, I know a couple of commercial photographers that started off as press photographers, really. And although it might be hard to kind of say they've definitely got a definitive style, the fact that they can turn their hand to a lot of different jobs has allowed them to kind of be commercially successful at least. Um, and it's not for everyone, but for those people, it might be like the way that they like to work, just because they like
yeah.
keeping busy and they don't really
I
care,
mean,
they don't
like
mind what they're shooting.
I say, I don't really criticize anyone for doing anything. I mean, if a photographer wants to go off and earn a bit of money doing something that they wouldn't normally do, that's absolutely fine. Everyone
Mhm.
has to earn a living, but I think if you want to sort of move up through the levels, you just have to pay attention sometimes to what kind of pictures you're taking and how they fit into the zeitgeist and how who's going to commission you. Who,
Mm,
which brands do you think are going to in 5 years' time? If I get a big body of work, a hotel work, which brand's going to commission? So it just needs some thought instead of just.
mm.
But it's quite
I think
hard for people to when you're a photographer to do that. To
Yeah. Do you think it's because a lot of people? That's why when people come to you, for example, as a consultant, that's one of the most helpful things is just being able to voice their thoughts and concerns, but not be just shouting that into a void. Like
yeah.
having somebody that can
Well,
actually sit there and say, "Well, from a commercial perspective, this is my feedback on those ideas."
it's good to just have people, yeah, someone to talk to about that. I think it really is, and I think it's good to, I think you should be doing all the things you can, meeting people in the industry as much as you can, getting advice from people, having coffees with people, just doing as much as that as you can, and try and take it all in and try and understand. Like I say, there'd be a lot of conflicting views because
Mm.
particularly now, there's no right way of doing it. And I mean, at the moment, I'm working with a photographer called Alan Schaller, and you probably know him. He's got 1.1 million followers on Instagram,
Mm.
and
Just a couple then.
yeah, and that's that's a whole different, you know, that's a whole different lane. I mean, that's a whole different
Mm.
thing, and it's incredibly interesting what that has brought him.
Yeah.
He worked incredibly hard at it, and it's incredibly interesting the amount of inquiries he gets. Most of them from time wasters, but the
Yeah.
amount of inquiries he gets because of that. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but again, that's not easy to do to build up that kind of following.
No,
No.
but I mean, if you compare it to kind of magazine circulation numbers or something, that's
Yeah,
insane,
of
isn't it?
course. Yeah,
It's
I
it's
know.
like
Yeah, I mean, it's insane. It's insane, and he's got a YouTube channel with 80,000 people on it or something.
yeah, I've seen it. It's very good. It's very good. He's got
So
a very good sense of humor and way
yeah,
of being on
yeah,
camera,
he's really
which
really
obviously
good fun.
works.
So that's been very interesting for me to kind of see that because I wasn't fully aware of that sort of side of the industry. I was probably looking at sort of more traditional things, and it's
Mm,
been a super learning curve for me to see how he did that and how that kind of works for him.
mm,
Can I don't know, so obviously going back to the traditional stuff, obviously we just talked about, going, seeing people, doing meetings,
Yeah.
having coffees. I'll just speak personally because I'm sure it will hopefully probably resonate, unless it's just me and it's really personal. But now, since COVID, when people are only in the office 1, 2, 3 days a week, it feels like now it's so hard to get meetings and nobody has time for a coffee. Nobody has time to even really respond to emails, let alone see you in person. How would somebody kind of, I mean, it's just, this is the new normal, isn't it? Just fighting to try and get to see someone.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult. And I don't really necessarily have an answer to that. When Alan Schaller put his book out about a year ago, I was like, well, let's mail a few off to some of my commissioner friends. And they were,
Mhm.
and I was like, it suddenly occurred to me that none of them are in an office anymore. So it's like,
Yeah.
you know, it's not like you sort of bike a load over to BBH because they're never there. So, I mean,
Mm.
so yes, but it is, I think when I do manage to get people, I think people love it. But at the same time, I don't really know. But again, your network, whatever kind of network that is, whether it's a LinkedIn network, whether it's a social media, I think you do need to nurture that network
Mm.
and try and expand it as much as you can, and just
Mhm.
try and get to as many people as you can. And ultimately, I think if your pictures are good enough, you will. I'm still a big believer that you will get discovered on some level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're doing some nice work.
See, all I've
So,
heard from that, Tim, is that I'm not doing nice work.
Well, what's nice work? I mean, that's the other thing. I
Well,
mean, that's where,
quite.
I mean, what I think is nice work, someone else might think is rubbish. So it's a subjective. That's the whole thing. Why the randomness comes. It's just a subjective business, and
Yeah.
it still can really work. I've had several occasions in the last couple of years with photographers where they've done incredibly big ad jobs and got incredibly well paid, and it's life changing
Mm.
for them, um and it's a delight when it happens, but it's just occasionally you're
Yeah.
sitting
yeah.
there staring at your computer trying to make it happen. you know
Yeah.
Well, it must have been fascinating going from, because you were saying about kind of, looking at photographers and thinking, how does, whether or not I take this photographer on because I love their work, but maybe it's not commercially viable. So to then go from that to working at Magnum, which is full of all sorts of
I know.
characters, amazing photographers, arguably, probably
Yeah.
must have been in a similar situation, looking at them
Well, it
going,
was.
how do
I
we
mean,
make this commercially viable for some of
well,
them?
I mean, after my moment with Bounty Jump, I thought, well, I'm just going to sort of drive a tractor now or do something like that because work in the Tesco's or something. But then Magnum called me, and I was intrigued, and I thought, how hard can that be? It's Magnum Photos, for Christ's sake.
Mm.
Everyone loves Magnum Photos, and it was actually incredibly difficult because I mean, I could do a whole podcast on Magnum Photos if you like. I mean, it's I joined.
I'd love that.
Yeah, I was there for 7 years, 7 or 8 years, and because they had starting to realize they weren't making any money from editorial anymore, they thought, well, we'll get a commercial agent in, and we'll all become commercial advertising photographers.
Mm.
And as you know, that's not as easy as it looks. I mean, they had a core set of sort of 7 or 8 people like Martin Parr and Christopher Anderson, Steve McCurry, who could handle a commercial brief, but a
Mhm.
lot of them were not able to do that. So there was a lot of education from me. There was a lot of going around. I mean, I remember that's when I had some energy. I wasn't so old. I did sort of 130 meetings or something. And everyone wanted to see Magnum and everyone wanted to understand what we did. But they
Mhm.
found it very hard to commission Bruce Gilden for anything or those kind of photographers. I mean, they're incredible. It was an incredible agency and there was some amazing stuff. But politically, it's very different as well because the photographers own the agency. So
Mm.
you really feel like you're working for them.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, and also I had no choice on who joined, and I don't have any say on who joined, who does, who gets let go. Um,
Mm.
and it's quite brutal. And then the other thing that is absolutely hilarious with Magnum is because it's owned by the photographers, they make up their own rules, um,
Right.
right? And you can imagine. So uh, one rule they had was they were allowed to have outside agents. So I was going around.
Hang on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I was going around selling Christopher Anderson, Martin Parr, Steve McCurry, and it turns out that all of those photographers had another agent
Right.
in London, and it was
Wow.
like because, and I was like, this doesn't work. Either you're with Magnum or you're kind of not, because it
Right.
Yeah.
just doesn't work. And obviously, all the people, every phone call we got was from Martin Parr,
Yeah.
and I mean, Martin Parr was actually quite good. I did some good jobs with him, and he kept a lot in Magnum. But there were some other commercial photographers, just all their commercial work went to their commercial
I
agent.
mean, I imagine for a number of years, him on his own was probably keeping Magnum kind of afloat. The amount of work that he produces and how in demand he was, and and obviously when he joined, from what I understand, it was with certain members of Magnum, it was a controversial decision, and there was a bit of kickback from certain older members of the agency, and yet he was able to kind of
Yeah,
straddle those two horses of
I mean,
somebody who's a documentarian and
he shot in color, didn't he? Which
yeah,
was devastating for Magnum at the time. But
yeah,
it's yeah, he was a controversial, but he's incredible. I mean, I did those BBC idents with him. That was the job I
hmm
got, which was a big job, and we did a lot of work with McCallum, which has been one of my brands that I've worked with for years. And yeah, he's incredible. And what he did amazingly in the 80s was he took pictures of really boring stuff, supermarkets, petrol forecourts, all the really boring things, right? But now the pictures are incredible. 30 years later, everyone's like, this is an historic record. But
yeah.
if you went out now and said, I'm going to do a project on Sainsbury's, you'll be like, everyone will be like, what are you doing? But he did it, and 30 years later, it's an incredible historical record, and yeah, incredible. I mean, there was some amazing. I mean, politically, Magnum is very, very difficult. They're always losing money left, right, and center. They had 4 offices around the world: London, New York, Paris, Tokyo. They employed 65 people, and it was basically a documentary photography agency. So
Mm.
it was always a bit of a struggle, but I did end up getting some amazing work. I was seen as the money guy.
I mean, it's interesting because I think, like, from an outsider's perspective, I was, Magnum was one of those agencies. Was growing up, I was obsessed by. I read the Russell Miller book that was, I think, for the 50th anniversary, and I was really intrigued by it. But I think if you ask people on the street, they probably would have never heard of it because it was a niche thing within
Yeah.
a niche industry. But I think in the last few years, and quite possibly part of your influence and other people who are working there's influence, it has become, I don't want to use the word mainstream, but it's certainly become more, people are more aware of it. I think part of that's through the Magnum print sales. Part of it's just through general levels of exposure of the agency and how it is so unique. Um, so it's kind of gone from something that was a bit of a dusty kind of neat. I mean, obviously it wasn't, it's hard for me to say because I wasn't around in the 60s and 70s when it would have been very, its
Mm.
real heyday with magazines and being
Yeah.
commissioned. But certainly growing up in the kind of late 80s, early 90s, it wasn't as well known
I think it had
as
to
it is
do
now.
it had to change like that. It was struggling. Um, it was struggling to kind of make sense. I mean, those magazines that used to spend 25 grand on a photographer going around the world shooting whatever they wanted. They just don't exist anymore. So we had to kind of figure out a way of getting, I worked up with Alex Self, who's amazing as well. I mean, we had to work a way of getting these brands in to work with Magnum, and it actually
Hmm.
worked really. A lot of those brands were very much into storytelling. So
Mm,
For Nike, for example, we used to do this thing where we'd send a photographer and a journalist to hang out with an athlete for 3 days, and we got these insights and these intimate pictures, and Nike published it on their website. So it's like a piece of editorial, but kind
mm,
of in a commercial kind of environment.
Mhm.
And Magnum were very, very good at that kind of work, and
yeah.
brands at the time were very keen on that kind of work because they were just getting into the sort of storytelling thing. And so we sort of landed that quite nicely.
Do you,
But
yeah.
it was a tough gig, and it took all of my energy for a long, long time. But it was quite nice for me because it sort of was a very different scene to the one I'd been in before. So it was a very nice kind of different kind of environment, you know.
Is it? I mean, you must have, as I said, you could do a whole pod on this, but you must have some hilarious stories from kind of your time there and some of the characters and the
Yeah.
escapades that they got up to.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, the first time I met Joseph Kudelka was when I came into the office one morning and I tripped over him. He was asleep on a sleeping bag. He used to sleep in the office in London.
He was a famous vagabond in that way, wasn't
Yeah, I mean, literally, he was just, and he was like, "Hey, Tim,
Yeah.
how you doing?" It's like, "Oh, great." And you know, you're sitting there and you have you have having a chat with Elliot. There are amazing times you can chat with Elliot. I remember I had this dinner with Martin Barr, Paolo Pellegrin, and Joseph Kudelka, and you're just like, you know, it's so, there are some incredible, and you know, I traveled a lot with them, and but you know, a good example of sort of how sort of naive they were was I had a commission in from Range Rover, so I sent out a note to 15 photographers and saying, "Have you got any pictures of cars that I can add to put a portfolio together so that we can see who's good for this?" And one photographer I won't mention sent me a picture, sent me 10 beautiful pictures of burnt out cars from Syria, and and I mean, you know, I mean, obviously, you know, and in some ways, what I really admired about these photographers is they chose to take those kind of pictures. You know,
Mm.
they could have all just, you know, taken pictures of models in a studio in Hoxton like everyone else, you know, but they chose to travel around the world, get paid really badly, put themselves in danger, and document these things. And you have to kind of tip your hat to those
Oh,
men and women
absolutely.
do that. So for me, it was trying to make commercial sense of that was one of my biggest challenges,
Would
and I think I did okay for a bit, but obviously, you know, you with Magnum, you're the new kid on the block, and then you can only stay there for a while. It just becomes a bit weird.
do you think it's what do they? I mean, do you think they all have in common just an inane curiosity about the world, or
Yeah,
is
they're
it?
all slightly bonkers. I mean,
Mm,
literally, you know, but also they're yes, yeah. I mean, Martin Parr actually is incredible when you work with him. He chats to everyone. He goes into a room and he finds out about them. He's very inquisitive. He's got such an inquisitive mind, and I think a lot of them have. You know, even people like Bruce Gilder and stuff. He's very interested in people and interested
mm.
in what people do. And yeah, you know, I think to be that kind of photographer, you have to. But you know, it's not necessarily the best. You know, taking pictures of bottles of Chanel might be more financially better, but
Do you think in a world though that we're entering now, where obviously AI is kind of getting better and better every single day, and more realistic, agencies such as Magnum will almost have another kind of surge in a way, because people will be striving for something that feels authentic,
yeah,
something that can be verified and that has credibility.
I think that's been true for possibly the last 10 years, is that people are looking for authenticity and authentic stories. And I
Mm,
think AI is obviously going to be a problem with that. I don't really know where AI is going to go. I think you know, I speak to some photographers and they've got their heads in the sand, they're just ignoring it, which is fine. And I speak to other photographers and they go, we got through CGI, it's fine. You know, I actually think this is going to be a bigger threat than.
Mhm.
I mean, you can go on Instagram now and you can see what they call digital artists, and they're creating
mm,
fashion shoots that you would not be able to tell the difference. And
yeah.
there's no model, there's no stylist, there's no hair, there's no location costs. So I
Yeah.
think there will be some brands that will, in maybe a year or a couple of years, where the technology is just a little bit better. I think there will be some brands that just go for that option, and
Mm,
it's I think it is going to be quite devastating. But you're right, there will always be, but then not everyone has, you know, all the photographers have a luxury of an archive from the 80s, 70s, you know, for the new photographers who are just starting in the last 5 years, it's going to be quite a difficult, it's going to be quite a difficult thing. And I'm still haven't quite understood how anyone's going to kind of get around it. because
Mm.
what these brands like, it's just down to the money, and
Yeah.
if they can do it cheaper and make it look good, then they're gonna probably do it.
Well, I mean, I've just lost a job. It happens to us all. But they came to me with a very, very. They obviously the brief had AI renders in, and they came to me and said, "Oh, this is what we want to do." And I was like, "Okay, fine. I'll not go into specifics, obviously, but I was like, okay, well, I've rung producers, and I was like, how much is this going to cost?" And the bare bones lowest the producers gave me figure wise, and talking proper skeleton everything, was 4 times what the agency thought it was going to cost.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know how now that job will go ahead. That job, they will now go down the AI route because they've told the client they have an unrealistic.
I think
They
there'll
don't.
always. I think there'll always be some brands that won't want to do it like that, and they'll prefer the human. They'll
Mhm.
prefer the human approach and the real photography, and there'll be a number of brands, but like I say, the sort of cheaper sort of fashion brands and maybe some of the cheaper product brands, and will probably go down that route, and which is going to cut a big chunk of work out from the bottom of a lot of photographers who do that kind of work. So
Mhm.
I don't think you're going to get the big luxury brands necessarily going down that route, because they've got celebrity endorsements, and they've got a new car launch and things like that. I think
Yeah.
there'll be an element, maybe an element of the process that is done in AI, but
Mhm.
I think photographers will still be involved. But I
Oh,
just
I agree. I think also there's going to be a lot of brands that kind of go, okay, well, it's more of an event now doing a shoot. It's less just creating assets. And it's now like, okay, what else can we get from the shoot? Can we get your friend down to do a full behind the scenes thing? Right. While we're
yeah.
there, we'll get someone on to do socials.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, I think it'll be much more of an event.
Oh, I mean,
Mm.
that's sort of how it is now. I mean, every time we do a
Mm.
shoot now, there's always 3 or 4 kids on iPhones shooting social media content, and a couple of BTS people, and so all
Well,
those people are.
the K-pop band.
Oh, yeah, tell me.
Niche gag there for you. Sorry.
I know. I mean, it's kind of like every time we do a shoot now, there's always tons of people shooting loads of content. So it's.
Yeah.
I mean, that sort of exists now, but you're right. It will. But my
Oh,
concern is that,
sorry. My point was actually badly made. What I was saying is that actually the BTS wouldn't be necessarily shot on a phone. It might become its own little production in itself.
yeah,
To get more value or production value from it.
yeah, true, which is a good thing.
Mm.
I mean, given all of that, then what's your takeaways for photographers who are kind of looking to the future in terms of, obviously it's important to kind of look after your archive if you've got one. It's important to realize that there's value in that archive, and to manage it, and to use all the new tools that are available to help manage that with, in any way that you can. Is photography kind of destined, do you think, to become a bit more of a niche kind of pastime in the same way that, and go the same way that illustration and painting and drawing has gone? Is it going to
I
become a
mean,
craft
I
rather
think
than a?
there will be a push against it, but I also think that I think photographers will have to be creative in a sphere, and if it means you know kind of getting involved in other areas of the creative process than that. Well, you're kind of doing that already, but I don't. I think the lineation between a creative director and a photographer is going to be the lines are going to be blurred in terms of that. So
Mm,
I think the skill set of photographers is going to have to be wider. Unfortunately, I know it's hard enough just being a photographer, but I think the skill sets, and you're going to have to understand the competition, and you're going to have to understand AI. But
Mhm.
I still think the same rules apply in terms of being good at one thing. Yes, I think the skill sets are still important. You still have to understand what lane you're in. Try and be really good at one thing. Get recognized as being the photographer who does that thing really well.
Mm.
And I think the creativity around that is going to be broader in terms of you might have to involve other technologies and other things in what you do. In the same way that a lot of photographers, have to, in the last 10 years, have had to work out how to do motion and all that stuff. So I think unfortunately there's another layer of complexity coming into the creative process that I think young photographers are going to have to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's an interesting food for thought. I think we're probably coming up to the time when we need to start wrapping up. So we have our final two questions that we always ask our guests, which are your desert island camera and your desert island photo book.
I've got my book. Well, I've got
You've
2
got
books.
it. You physically got it.
Am I allowed 2 books?
Yeah,
How big are they?
Really big. I like a big photo book. So this is the first one, which is it's got the best name for photography book. It's Alex Webb.
I have that one.
The Suffering of Light, which is fantastic. And it's just a fantastic. I mean, Alex Webb is the don when it comes to street photography, and he's goes around with a Leica at 35mm and just takes these incredible, colourful pictures. And this book is just an absolute piece of genius, and I keep on going back to it. And then this is another one that I got when I was younger that had a big effect on me. Joel Steinford, American Prospects.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, which is an absolute
very different.
Well, yeah, a different style, but still, this is an absolute beauty. And I really like photographers that capture a moment, and this is a sort of captured moment of American history, which is just superb. So that was that. And my favorite camera, which I've got here as well at the moment, is this little Ricoh.
Oh, the GR3?
Yeah, the GR2, I think I've got.
Oh, right, okay.
And it's
they
my
brought
desert.
Out so many different models, didn't they?
It's my desert island one because it's kind of small, but the quality is amazing. And I just
there's like 4 or 5 variations of each model or something.
No, not on the GR2. On the GR3, I know they released a street version. And
that's what I mean. Like on the GR3, there's quite a few variations.
So, which again is simple enough for me to use. When I was a photographer, I had a Nikon FE2, which was you could throw it out a window and it would survive. So it was a film camera, and trust me, it did get thrown out of a window a few times. But, when I was working with bands and stuff, but that little one's really good. I was going to say actually, just before we go, if there's anyone listening to this who would like some photography advice,
yes,
absolutely,
very much so.
Please say I'd happily do a half an hour free with everyone who sends an email to me with exposed negative in the title.
Wow, so, that's mega generous.
I'm assuming I'm not going to get 10,000 emails, but
you better put a time limit on it within the next 6 months.
If
10 years time.
Any young photographers out there who want to hear my words of wisdom, maybe or not.
Well,
that's very generous.
That's incredibly generous. So, I mean, where can people find you? Give them all the deets.
Well, my website is called ourfriendtim.com. And my email is tim@timpaton.co.uk. So, or just contact me through Instagram, Tim Paton 1.
And that's just Paton.
Paton. And
perfect.
Happy to chat with anyone and look at their work and see if there's a way through that I can see that that might help.
Well, I think me and Tom will be the first in the queue.
Yeah. I'm expecting.
There we go.
You guys to be in touch. Fantastic.
Perfect.
Well, I can vouch for that because obviously we chatted in COVID, Tim, and I still remember that conversation.
I did. Like I said, I did a call a day then, and it was a devastating time for photographers.
But I came away from that call very excited and kind of
and
I
think also a lot of photographers during that time were being quite introspective, and they were looking at their work and trying to figure out if they were enjoying what they were doing, and they were like reassessing their portfolios and stuff. So it was quite a useful time. But there were so many photographers who just had all their work cancelled literally overnight, and it was absolutely devastating. And
right here.
Yeah, I know. So I thought just trying to chat to a few of them was useful. Gave me a reason to get out of bed, as it were. But,
I'm sure they appreciated it.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. I've made some good friends, so it's good.
Perfect. Well, listen, talking about appreciation, can I just say a big thank you for taking the time to come on?
Pleasure.
Yeah. We will put all the information for the names and the people that you've mentioned in the show notes, and obviously your contact details. So
Lovely. Great.
to anyone who's listening, yeah.
And if you want to do a
a
Substack or whatever you call it about Magnum, just let me know.
Perfect.
I'd love to deep dive. Yeah,
Deep dive
definitely.
is the word. Yeah, good. All right,
Yeah.
guys. So thank you very much. That was wonderful. Thank you so
A
much.
pleasure, Tim.
Good
Thank you
to
ever so
speak
much.
to you.
Cheers, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you.